Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 27. Motion as Transformation Axis. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to just one of those echoes. We now stand at the culminating vista of Episode 8, the pure abstract language. Our journey through the abstract foundations is nearing its completion. We have already uncovered two great pillars of experience: time as sequence and space as coexistence. We have the ordered pages of the book of reality and the wide page upon which many symbols can exist together. But a book of still pages, however perfectly ordered and beautifully arranged, is not yet a living story. A story needs connection, development, and direction. Something must actually happen from one page to the next. Today, we discover the principle that animates those still pages. We complete our exploration of Book 8.7, Abstract Dimensionality, by turning to the axis that binds sequence and coexistence into the dance of reality. This is Part 27, Motion as Transformation Axis. We are going to search for the pure abstraction of change itself. Not just change in time, measured by omega, and not just difference in space, measured by k, but the deeper bridge that links here and now to there and then in a coherent way. We are looking for motion not just as speed, but as the fundamental principle of connection. Motion, in this sense, is the rule that tells phi how to move from one configuration to another. It is the logic that ties the story together so that every frame of reality is not an isolated picture, but part of a continuous, meaningful unfolding. First, let us ground this in a simple story image. Imagine a puppeteer behind a small stage, working a marionette. When the puppet hangs still, it already has a spatial structure. The head is here, the arms are there, the legs are below. That is the spatial coexistence of its parts. If you took a photograph right now, you could describe where everything is, and that would be a snapshot of space. Now the puppeteer begins. With a small movement of the wrist, they pull one string, and the puppet's head begins to nod. With a coordinated motion of the other hand, they pull another string, and the puppet's arm rises and gestures. A moment later, the legs shift, and the puppet takes a tiny step forward. If you freeze the scene at each instant, you see a different arrangement of the same parts. One still image, then another, then another. Time is the ordering of these images. Space is the arrangement of the puppet's parts inside each image. But the real magic is not in the individual snapshots. It is in the way they follow one another. There is a consistent connection between the movement of the puppeteer's hands and the changes you see in the puppet's pose. Pull this string now, and the head goes there. Flick that string next, and the arm moves up. The sequence of hand motions is mapped to a sequence of posture changes. That mapping, that reliable, if I do this, the puppet becomes that, is what we mean here by abstract motion. It is not simply how fast things happen. It is the existence of a rule that connects one spatial configuration to the next across the sequence axis. It is the structured bridge between before and after, written in the language of transformation. In the language of phi, we already have the sequence of configurations, which is our abstract time, and the internal spread of values within each configuration, which is our abstract space. Motion is the rule that says which spatial pattern is allowed to follow which, and in what way. Given a particular pattern of phi right now, motion is the structure that decides what patterns can legitimately come next. To see this in linguistic terms, remember how we used language as a guiding analogy. Time was like the rule that allows one sentence to follow another. Space was like the ability for a sentence to carry multiple clauses at once. Motion is like the grammar of plot. In a story, you do not just have sentence 1, sentence 2. You have sentence 1, therefore sentence 2. The hero finds a key. That matters because it allows the hero to open a locked door later. The earlier state of the world leads to a new possible state. There is a logical bridge. Because the hero had the key, the door opening is not random. The story has motion. In the phi language, motion is the therefore between whole configurations. It is the fact that the state of phi at one moment leads, according to its inner rules, to a specific family of allowed future states. If you know the transformation rules, you do not just know what the universe is, you know how it will evolve. You can feel the difference. Time alone just stacks frames. Space alone fills each frame with detail. Motion makes those frames talk to one another. It turns the universe from a gallery of disconnected pictures into a consistent film. Now let us turn this into a more scientific picture without leaving the simplicity of our story. Think of the space of all possible configurations of phi as a huge landscape. Each point in this landscape represents one complete way the universe could be arranged at an instant. One point might correspond to a calm sea, another to a stormy sky, another to a human thinking, a galaxy rotating, and a leaf falling all at once. There are unimaginably many such points. A history of the universe is then a path through this landscape. Time, as sequence, is the parameter that labels points along this path. Here is where we were at step 1, here at step 2, here at step 3. Space is the structure inside each point along the path, the internal shape of the universe at that step. Motion, in this picture, is the rule that tells you what direction the path takes at each point. If you know where you are in the configuration landscape now, and you know the motion rule, you can predict where you will be an instant later. Motion is the tangent direction of the path, the local arrow assigned to each point that says, from here, this is how you move. Mathematically, we have seen this in pieces. Omega, the time derivative of phi, tells you how phi is changing at each spatial point if you fix the location and watch the value over the sequence axis. The spatial gradient k tells you how phi changes between neighboring locations at a fixed moment. Motion is the deeper law that relates these. It says that omega and k are not independent decorations, but are tied together by specific equations. For a simple wave, the law says that the temporal change and the spatial change are linked. Where the spatial shape is curved in a certain way, that curvature drives the time evolution, and vice versa. In a diffusion process, the time change at a point depends on the curvature of the concentration across space. Where there is a sharp difference, diffusion smooths it out. In both cases, we are dealing with a transformation rule coupling time and space behavior. So abstract motion is not a separate thing floating on top of phi. It is the name we give to the consistent constraints that join the time derivatives and the space derivatives into a coherent evolution. To make this even more intuitive, let us revisit our three echoes: time, space, and motion, but now from the perspective of the motion axis. In the time echo, motion appears as rhythm and pattern in change. Imagine a simple heartbeat. The heart goes through a repeating sequence: relaxed, contracting, ejecting blood, relaxing again. The transformation from one stage to the next is the same each cycle. The period, or the time between beats, is a temporal measure. The motion is the stable pattern of this state turns into that state and then back again. You can describe it as a cycle in state space. Even without talking about distances or speeds, you feel the presence of an underlying rule of transformation. In the space echo, motion shows up as trajectories and flow fields. Think of a drawing of the orbit of a planet around a star. On the page, nothing is moving. It is a static picture. Yet the curved line encircling the star represents how the planet's position transforms over time. Or consider a diagram of wind arrows on a weather map. Each arrow shows, at that location, the direction in which the air is being pushed. This is a static representation of a flow field, a snapshot of the motion rule. Space allows us to freeze motion into shapes that stand for transformations. In the motion echo itself, motion appears as pure translation. Imagine a simple pattern on a line of lights. Only one light is on, and it moves one step to the right at each tick of a clock. At step 1, the first light is on. At step 2, the second. At step 3, the third. The transformation rule is very simple. Take the active light and shift it one position to the right. This is motion in its most minimal abstract form. The rule that maps one spatial pattern into another along the sequence axis. In the master tree image of Holophase, time as sequence was the trunk that rises, and space as coexistence was the branching canopy that spreads out at each level. Motion, in this picture, is like the sap that flows through trunk and branches, guiding how the tree grows, how it bends towards the light, how it thickens here and thins there. The tree's form at any moment is its spatial structure. The years of rings in the trunk are its temporal history. The laws that govern how it responds to light, gravity, and nutrients, how buds become leaves, how branches extend or wither, these are its motion rules. They decide how the tree's shape transforms from one year to the next. In the language of derivatives, motion is encoded in the coupled equations that relate the three main towers we have been exploring: the temporal tower, the spatial tower, and the mixed kinematic tower. The quantity v, which we introduced as motion built from omega and k, is the first and simplest expression of this axis. It tells us how a recognizable feature, a crest of a wave, a localized excitation, moves across the coexistence domain as time unfolds. Now let us look at how motion sits in relation to its neighbors. With time and space, motion is their synthesis. Time gives you step by step. Space gives you place by place. Motion gives you step by step, this place connects to that place in this way. It is the recipe for continuous, coherent world lines instead of random jumps. With omega and k, motion is the law that binds them. A pure equation of motion is always some statement like, the way phi accelerates in time is related to how it curves in space. This is true in wave equations, in diffusion equations, in Schrödinger's equation, in Maxwell's equations. The detailed forms differ, but the pattern is the same. Time behavior and space behavior are not separate. They are coupled through motion rules. With V, motion takes on a more familiar face. Once you have an identifiable pattern that persists long enough, you can track its position over time and get a velocity. But that velocity only makes sense because there is an underlying transformation law of the field that keeps the pattern coherent as it moves. With information and computation, motion is the carrier. A signal is information in motion. It is a particular pattern of phi that travels. Computation, which we explored before, is guided motion in the space of possible states. It is a long, rule-driven walk through configuration space, from input region to output region. With causality, motion is the concrete mechanism that allows causes to influence effects. A cause is a particular field configuration at one place and time. An effect is a different configuration at another place and time. Motion is the allowed chain of transformations between them. If you break that chain, causality dissolves. From the semantic point of view, abstract motion is what turns a static description of what is into a living description of what is becoming. It allows reality to have processes, not just structures, developments, not just arrangements. It is why we can speak of growth, decay, evolution, learning, and change. Without motion, you could still list the possible states of the universe. You could still describe where everything is and how it differs across space. But there would be no story, no arrow, no unfolding. Motion is the universe's ability to move through its own library of possible pages according to a meaningful script. To feel how central this is, look at a few examples across different scales. In physics, a wave on the surface of water is a perfect picture of the motion axis. The shape of the wave is a spatial pattern. The up and down oscillation of each point is temporal change. The fact that a crest travels from left to right is the motion rule tying them together. The wave equation is nothing more than the formal statement of that rule. In chemistry, think of a reaction front spreading through a medium. At the front, some reactants are being converted into products. Behind the front, only products remain. Ahead of it, only reactants. The transformation rule says that where certain concentrations meet, a reaction occurs, and the products diffuse, carrying the front forward. The moving front is motion, the reaction diffusion equations are its grammar. In biology, take the growth of a child. At each age, the body has a certain structure. The sequence of these structures over years is time. The internal arrangement of organs and tissues is space. The developmental program written in genetics and regulated by signaling pathways is the motion rule. It says how one form transforms into the next in a directed way. In human technology, a simple conveyor belt illustrates motion very clearly. Objects placed on the belt at one end are carried along and eventually arrive at the other. The belt provides a fixed spatial array. The rotation of the mechanism supplies a consistent transformation that slides everything along. The relation between where something is now and where it will be later is completely determined by the motion rule of the belt. In thinking and conversation, motion shows up as the way ideas follow one another. A question leads to a reflection. A reflection leads to an insight. An insight leads to a decision. There is a kind of equation of motion in your inner life, made of associations, reasoning steps, and emotional shifts. It is not yet formal mathematics, but it is still a structured transformation that links mental states in sequence. To recognize motion in the world, you can train yourself to ask a simple question whenever you see change. What is the rule here? When you watch smoke curling from a candle, you can feel that it is not random. Heat rises, air flows, turbulence forms. Those physical laws make the smoke follow graceful, recognizable patterns. That patterning is motion. When you see a flock of birds wheel and swirl as if they were a single organism, the underlying rules of local alignment and avoidance are the motion axis at work in a living system. Now we return to phi and gather the pieces together. Phi is one continuous cyclic movement. Its derivatives, stacked into the infinite tower of the Holophase jet, give us all the questions we can ask about how that movement is changing. From the very first derivatives, we see three fundamental shadows: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. These are not three separate ingredients. They are three tightly coupled ways of reading the same unfolding. In episode 8, we have been treating phi as a pure language before any particular universe is chosen as its story. We have seen how this language can carry symbols, grammar, meaning, information, complexity, memory, and computation. In Book 8.7, we stepped back and asked how this language naturally organizes itself into dimensions, even before we pin numerical values on them. In Part 25, we saw that time, in this abstract realm, is simply the sequence axis, the ordering of configurations into before and after. In Part 26, we saw that space is the coexistence axis, the ability to have many different values and structures inside one moment. In this Part 27, we have now seen that motion is the transformation axis, the consistent mapping from one structured moment to the next. Time is then, space is and, motion is leads to. Together, they form the basic grammar of change in the Holophase language. Any concrete physics we will build later must respect this triadic structure. Every law will be, in the end, a rule about how phi's spatial patterns transform along the sequence axis according to some motion principle. You do not need to remember every technical detail to carry the heart of this with you. It is enough to feel that the universe is not a set of disconnected facts, but a woven story. Phi is the thread. Time is the order in which the thread is laid down. Space is the breadth of the fabric at each stage. Motion is the way the thread is carried from place to place to create the pattern. As you move through your own life, you can begin to see everything through this lens. The people in your life, the places you inhabit, the thoughts you think, all of them are spatial arrangements of phi at each moment. The sequence of your experiences is time. The way one experience leads into another, the habits you form, the changes you undergo, are all expressions of motion as transformation. With this, we have completed our abstract exploration of dimensionality in the Holophase language. The next step in our journey will be to look at how this triad of time, space, and motion echoes through every structure we have already introduced, and how it sets the stage for the full physical theory that will follow. There is another way to feel the importance of motion. Imagine a universe where you could list all possible states, and you knew which ones could coexist, but there was no consistent rule linking them over sequence. Each moment, reality could jump to any random configuration, with no relation to what came before. You would still have time as a bare ordering, and space as a spread of possibilities, but you would have no patterns, no laws, no learning, no memory of cause and effect. Such a universe would be almost unthinkable to us. It would be pure randomness stitched into a meaningless sequence. Motion is the opposite of that. Motion is the quiet insistence that change must respect some internal logic. For our purposes, it is enough to hold a picture in your heart. Motion is the style with which the universe moves from frame to frame. Just as a painter has a recognizable style that makes their works feel like they belong together, the universe has a characteristic style of change. Stones fall, smoke rises, and flames dance in recognizable ways. When we discover a law of nature, we are discovering a small piece of that style, a small part of the universal grammar of motion. When you drop a ball and watch it fall, you're not just seeing a position at one time and another position later. You're seeing a very specific kind of transformation that has been happening in exactly the same style for as long as there have been planets and gravity. Accelerations proportional to forces. Trajectories that can be predicted if you know the starting conditions. When you listen to a melody, you're not just hearing isolated notes. You're hearing a pattern of motion in pitch and intensity that follows musical rules. When you follow a thought as it unfolds into understanding, you're riding a wave of mental motion with its own inner logic. In each case, motion is what makes the change feel meaningful rather than random. Now, let us reconnect this to the larger journey of episode 8. We began with the idea that phi is a single, cyclic field from which all patterns unfold. From that root, we built an alphabet of derivatives, a grammar of how they combine, and a semantics of what those structures can mean. We introduced information as the narrowing of possibilities, complexity as the depth of derivation, memory as the way history leaves a trace, and computation as the ability of the language to run its own procedures. In Book 8.7, we stepped back from that richness and asked how this language naturally carves out the notions we call time, space, and motion, even before we talk about specific forces or particles. In part 25, we saw that time emerges as the bare ordering of whole configurations, the simple but powerful idea of before and after. In part 26, we saw that space emerges as the possibility of simultaneous difference, the and that lets many values exist together at one step of the sequence. In this part 27, we have now seen that motion is the third fundamental axis, the therefore that links the ordered and the simultaneous into a coherent flow. It is the language's native way of saying, given that the world is like this here and now, it will tend to become like that there and then, according to this rule. Time, space, and motion are not three separate ingredients sprinkled onto phi. They are three interlocked perspectives on how phi expresses itself. Every time we revisit the core mantra, one field phi, with its first derivatives revealing time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, we are being reminded of this triadic unity. Omega lives on the time axis. K lives on the space axis. V lives on the motion axis that binds them. Higher derivatives deepen and refine this picture, but they never break the unity. Each new layer of structure still casts three shadows: a temporal one, a spatial one, and a kinematic one. As we leave Power 27, take a moment to feel how far we have climbed in the Holophase master tree of language. From a single, undifferentiated field, we have ascended through its derivatives, unfolded its alphabet and grammar, traced its capacity for meaning and information, and now uncovered its internal geometry of time, space, and motion. We stand in the high branches, looking back at the whole tree. It is one organism, one language, one continuous movement. Yet it shows itself to us through these three intertwined axes. In the coming parts, we will use this understanding to illuminate how every physical law can be seen as a particular way of arranging these three axes inside the Holophase framework. For now, carry with you this simple, powerful image. Time as the order of the pages, space as the spread of each page, and motion as the way the story actually advances from page to page and rearranges what is written. Wherever you look, from galaxies drifting through the cosmos to a single tear running down a cheek, you can now see time, space, and motion working together as different faces of one underlying language. And beneath them all, you can sense the quiet, ceaseless oscillation of phi, writing and rewriting the story of existence through the laws of transformation it carries within itself. Salam, and peace be upon you.